The mind maze was not a test you studied for. That was the first thing every first-year student at the Galactic Academy of Cognitive Sciences learned. You could not prepare for it. You could not train for it. The maze was not interested in what you knew. It was interested in what you were. It read your mind the way a surgeon reads a wound, precisely, coldly, without mercy. In 400 years of operation, the maze had broken 17 students. Not failed them, broken them. 3 had needed full neural reconstruction. 1 had simply stopped speaking and never started again. The pass rate was 61%. Orion Vell, a Thalian student with 4 eyes and a ridge of silver cartilage running from his crown to the back of his neck, had spent 7 months preparing for the test he could not prepare for. He had meditated. He had practiced emotional suppression. He had read every account ever published by a survivor. He was terrified. Lissa Bren was not terrified. Lissa was human. She had arrived at the Academy 11 months ago from a mid-tier colony world called Harrow's End, a planet whose primary exports were iron, ore, dried fish, and people who didn't know when to quit. She was small by most species standards, dark-haired, with the kind of face that looked permanently amused by something no one else had noticed yet. She had spent the previous evening doing something Orion still could not fully process. "You did a puzzle," he said, for the 3rd time, as they waited in the long corridor outside the maze chamber. The walls hummed faintly. The air smelled like burnt copper and old stone. "A crossword puzzle," Lissa confirmed. "Finished it, actually. Took me about 40 minutes. Want to hear a clue? 7 letters. Ancient Earth currency. Starts with D. Lissa. Dollar. It's dollar. We are about to enter a psychic labyrinth that has permanently damaged 17 sentient beings." "I know." She stretched her arms above her head and rolled her neck. "Something in it cracked. That's why I did the puzzle. Helps me sleep." Orion stared at her. "You slept. 8 hours. Maybe 8.5. I had a dream about a bakery." He turned away from her and tried to remember his breathing exercises. The maze chamber was a perfect sphere of dark stone, 30 meters across, with a single chair at its center. The chair was plain. The chair was always plain. It was the most frightening piece of furniture Orion had ever seen. Professor Kareth, a 4-armed Devani elder with eyes like polished obsidian, stood at the entrance with a datapad. He called names alphabetically. Bren came before Vell. Lissa walked to the chair like she was walking to a lunch counter. She sat down. The maze activated. To any observer, nothing visible happened. The students simply sat. But inside, the maze was already at work. It found the edges of the mind and began to map them. It located the fears and turned them into corridors. It took the uncertainties, the shames, the things a person carried quietly in the dark spaces of themselves, and it built rooms out of them. Then it locked the doors. The test was not to conquer the rooms. The test was simply to find the exit. Most species, when confronted with a room built from their own deepest fear, did the natural thing. They reacted. They pushed back, or they froze, or they tried to reason with the architecture, which was useless because the architecture was not listening. The maze fed on resistance. The more you struggled, the more it shifted. The more it shifted, the more disoriented you became. The more disoriented you became, the harder the exit was to find. It was not a test of strength. It was a test of how you were when things made no sense. Lissa looked at the first room. It was her childhood bedroom on Harrow's End, except the ceiling had been replaced by open sky, and the sky was the wrong color. A flat, featureless gray, like the inside of a metal drum. In the corner sat a figure she recognized, but would not name, holding something she had lost a long time ago. She noted all of this. Then she looked for a door. There were 4 walls. One had a window looking out onto nothing. One had a closet she knew was not really a closet. One was blank. One had a door. She walked to the door and opened it. The maze shifted, a standard response to a subject who moved too quickly, who had not yet engaged with the emotional content of the room. It deepened the next corridor. It made the walls press in slightly. It placed something at the far end that was designed to trigger the prey response, the ancient stop NSS signal buried in most nervous systems. Lissa noticed the walls pressing in. She thought, narrowing. Okay. She kept walking. The maze escalated. The figure from the bedroom appeared again at the end of the corridor, closer now. The lost thing in its hands was clearer. The light in the corridor shifted to something sickly and uncertain. Lissa looked at the figure. she thought, with the casual, methodical attention of someone considering an ambiguous crossword clue. That's not real. That's a thing the room made. It's built from something true, but the thing itself isn't true. So what is it asking? Not, how do I make this stop? Not, why is this happening to me? Just, what is the shape of this? What does it connect to? Where does the logic go? She found the shape. She followed the logic. She located the next door. The maze, for the first time in 400 years, did something it had never done before. It paused. Not for long. A fraction of a second. An adjustment. It had processed millions of minds. It knew what minds did under pressure. But this mind was not behaving like a mind under pressure. It was behaving like a mind at rest, working a problem it had no emotional stake in, curious rather than afraid, patient rather than frantic. The maze had no category for this. It built the hardest room it had. The hardest room was different for every subject. For Lissa, it was not a room of grief or shame or failure. The maze was smarter than that. It had already learned, in the last 7 minutes, that she did not fight those things. She looked at them and kept walking. Her hardest room was a room with no doors at all. For blank walls. No window. No closet. The ceiling was low. The floor was cold. There was nothing to find because there was nothing there. Most subjects, in this room, began to spiral. Certainty collapsed. The mind, finding no external problem to solve, turned inward and began feeding on itself. Lissa sat down on the floor. She looked at the four walls for a while. She thought, a room with no doors is either a mistake or a trick. The maze doesn't make mistakes, so it's a trick. The exit is the wall itself, or the floor, or the ceiling, or I'm supposed to stop looking for an exit entirely. She lay flat on her back and looked at the low ceiling. She thought, the room with no doors isn't asking me to get out. It's asking me what I do when there's nowhere to go. She stayed very still. She waited. She was not afraid of the waiting. On Harrow's End, the winter nights were 14 hours long and perfectly dark. You learned to be comfortable inside your own skull. You learned that silence was not the same as emptiness, and that stillness was not the same as being stuck. She had done a lot of waiting in her life. She had found that things tended to resolve if you let them. After 67 seconds, the maze opened the floor. Or Ian went in 20 minutes later. He made it through. 61% always did. He emerged pale and shaking, and sat on the bench outside the chamber with his head in his three-fingered hands, and tried to remember what his name was. Lissa handed him a cup of something warm. How, he said finally. She sat down beside him. How what? You came out. You came out calm. You were in there for 11 minutes. The shortest recorded time is 19. She thought about it. The rooms it builds, they're real things, right? Real fears, real memories, real feelings. Yes. Then they're not traps. They're just rooms. She sipped from her own cup. I've been in hard rooms before. Real ones. You look at them long enough, you figure out what they're actually made of. Then you find the door. She paused. Or the floor opens up. Either way. Or Ian was quiet for a moment. The crossword puzzle, he said slowly. That wasn't for sleep. Lissa smiled. Just slightly. The way she always smiled, like she'd noticed something. Same skill, she said. Something that looks impossible, built out of things that each make sense. You stop asking why is this hard, and start asking what is this exactly. She set down her cup. The answer's always in there. You just have to be okay with looking. Across the corridor, Professor Kareth was staring at his datapad. He was looking at a result the system had flagged automatically. 11 minutes, 22 seconds. No cortisol spike detected. No elevated neural distress markers. Subject exhibited consistent low-frequency engagement throughout. At the bottom, the system had added a note it generated for unusual cases. Classification, anomalous. Kareth looked up at the human sitting on the bench. She was doing another crossword puzzle. He made a note to revise the curriculum.